Well, this episode is somehow the most epic and most disappointing of Season 4 so far. I won't deny the fact that the fights in this episode are pretty cool, but I sure as hell ain't gonna gloss over their shortcomings as well. But I get ahead of myself. Hey everyone, I'm the Professor Z, here today to review Overlord Season 4, Episode 11. And we start off this episode with an anime-only moment. Yep, this speech from the king never happens in the light novels. Instead, this moment is a combination of info we get throughout the latter half of the light novel, and honestly, I'd rather they give us this context in a scene of their own making, instead of just skipping it entirely. So, the king, who's still under house arrest due to Zanak's orders, is visited by the Minister of Internal Affairs, who assisted Zanak with the king's confinement. In short, the kingdom's army has been completely erased, and the Sorcerer's Kingdom is now camping on their front door. Ramposa, in an attempt to save who's left, relieves them of their positions, but we're well past that at this point. Anyone who could have left would have already, so anyone left is doomed to die. Well, everyone except the members of Eight Fingers. You see, Nazarick had informed them when the invasion began to gather 1,000 loyal people to be saved. The issue though is that Eight Fingers were never given a date or time for their saving, which has left them on constant standby for the Sorcerer's Kingdom's emissary's arrival. This is especially inconvenient for the newly rescued Coco doll. You see, earlier in this season, in a cut scene, Albedo asked the remaining leaders of Eight Fingers if they had replacements for the heads of the slave and defense branches of the organization. This led the group to recover Coco Doll from prison in order to fill the spot, despite the fact that he would be sent to take a dip in the cockroach pit. But you know what they say, misery loves company. Now, the reason he's stuck in this room is so they could introduce Coco Doll to the emissary as soon as possible. Coco Doll begins to pick up on the group's oddities though, and accuses them of plotting something. As Coco Doll is throwing out accusations, a gate opens up behind the group, and out comes Shaltir. Shaltir starts by calling for all 1,000 people to be brought to the gate, followed by conversing with a shadow demon that had been spying on Eight Fingers for God knows how long. Just to let you know, we have no idea what the shadow demon says, it's probably just a report on Eight Fingers' actions. Following this, in the light novels, Shaltir summons several undead to transport the luggage of the gathered people. Shortly after all the luggage has been moved, the various Eight Fingers members and their families arrive. The group is then moved to the fake Nazarick Aurora had created as their temporary living condition until the full village can be completed. With the group properly moved, Shaltir finally approaches Coco Doll and yanks him into a gate in order for him to take his own baptism in the cockroach pit. Now we move on to the next day as Cocytus, Aurora, and Mare alongside their troops march towards the capital, which they plan to completely destroy. The capital, having lost their main force a few days prior, is completely silent as the people cower in fear. The strange thing is that Ainz and Albedo are being left with only 10 Death Knights as protection. What could possibly be going on? So yeah, let's pull this bandit off right now. This isn't actually Ainz, it's Pandora's actor posing as Ainz, and in the anime there's a big visual hint at this. You see, the orb in Ainz's chest is missing, because that's not actually a part of Ainz's body, but is instead a very special item. Before I'm able to explain though, the power suit piloted by Azith rises up from the capital towards Ainz's encampment. This is all according to plan, however, as this was all a setup to draw out any potential enemies like Azith and his power suit. Speaking of which, Azith has arrived and his right wing discharges the 10th tier spell Chain Dragon Lightning, wiping out the Death Knights charged with protecting Ainz. Not skipping a beat, the power suit's left wing discharges the divine spell Firestorm, which makes direct impact with the Ainz and Albedo. Despite the spell targeting Ainz's weakness of fire due to the spell not being amplified or the caster being on the same level as Ainz, the spell isn't very effective, which comes as a surprise to Azith as he soon finds himself being chased down by Albedo. Now, the power suit is faster than Albedo's natural flight. However, Albedo does have items to mend this issue, but neglects to use them in order to test the suit's full abilities. This bicorn comment is also a bit of a joke since Albedo can't actually ride her bicorn. You see, bicorns are the opposite of unicorns, and while unicorns can only be ridden by pure maidens, bicorns can only be ridden by impure maidens, which Albedo is not. Azith then turns and begins to fire upon Albedo, and while she's prepared to take the attack to test its strength, It proves pointless as they bounce harmlessly off her. This is due to the NPCs having a resistance to non-enchanted attacks. Realizing that his weapon had no effect, Azith switches to magical-based attacks instead, specifically an instant death spell, which also proves to be ineffective due to their level differences. This futile attack pisses off Albedo as she goes in for a hit of her own, and while despite being a simple punch, the damage is shockingly high. What follows is a battle of words as Albedo attempts to coax any and all information she can from Azith. Meanwhile, Ainz confronts the Platinum Dragon Lord as he triggers Ainz' delay teleportation, followed by his Explode Mine. Using Life Essence, Ainz can tell that PDL's armor has a massive HP pool but lacks any mana. Something also of note is that Platinum, while monetarily expensive, doesn't actually have any magical properties, meaning that this armor must be made of some different kind of material other than Platinum. PDL doesn't waste much time though as his hammer soars through the air, striking Ainz in the chest, except the bludgeoning damage caused by the hammer is negated by the Body of Effulgent Burial, leaving Ainz completely unharmed. Taking this opportunity, however, Ainz flaunts this as a complete immunity to bludgeoning attacks. Yes, bludgeoning not physical, this is just another case of this season's translation issues. PDL then activates World Isolating Barrier, a skill that costs a sizable amount of his HP, but the prefix world is not for show, as it is an ability on par with a world-class item. Hoping to drag some info out of PDL, Ainz asks for his name, in which he received the alias Riku Agnai. Riku meaning land and Agnai meaning purity, which is fitting for PDL since he's a self-proclaimed world protector. Ainz then points out that there was a member of the 13 Heroes who was known for his platinum armor, and in the light novel, PDL responds that he didn't know that he was worthy of note. Ainz then requests that Riku join his side, even if it means cancelling his attack on the kingdom. So pretty much Gazif 2.0. And just like Gazif, PDL passes on the offer, and as he activates the skill Cloak of Light. Now that negotiations had broken down, Ainz casts Greater Teleportation, aiming for Nazarick, only to be stopped by the World Isolation Barrier. After testing both a coin and magic against the barrier, it's clear that the natural means cannot pass through this barrier. PDL then arrives once again, being stalled by the delayed teleportation, and casting another Body of Effulgent Burial, Ainz stands prepared, only to take knockback from PDL's hammer. Now the reason this is important is because when damage is nullified, so are secondary effects like knockback, yet PDL's attacks, despite being nullified, still applied knockback. Moving to the offensive, Ainz summons out 2 obsidian swords. One is deflected while the other is dodged by PDL, rotating 180 degrees, an impossible feat for any living creature. The fight continues as Ainz blocks the greatsword with a blasting staff he got from his inventory. Attempting to cast the necromancy spell Grasp Hard on PDL's armor completely fails, and in turn Ainz is struck by the greatsword. Moving away from the wall via Greater Teleportation, Ainz dive bombs towards PDL as he rises up in return. Ainz' obsidian swords and PDL's greatsword clash in midair as they pass each other, and as Ainz lands, PDL's lance embeds itself in the ground as Ainz barely dodges it. Both having landed on the ground, they begin to fight anew, as PDL for the first time takes a hold of his greatsword and shoots straight at Ainz. Despite taking Ainz' Call Greater Thunder, PDL just glides right through it, landing a direct attack on Ainz. Luckily, Ainz is able to send PDL flying with his Blasting Staff's knockback effect. This effect also applying to PDL's weapons, furthering the theory that they count as a part of PDL's body. And now we reach the first issue with this fight, the Doom Lord section. Now let me explain. Firstly, we barely get a good look at the monster, the camera is so constantly zoomed in and the smog effect on him is constantly covering everything else. The smog does make sense though, to an extent. You see, the Doom Lord is a level 70 warrior which constantly has a negative energy flowing from it, meaning that the smog effect in the anime makes sense, but the way they went about doing it just covers up everything entirely. Heck, when I first watched this episode, I couldn't even tell if they gave him the scythe he was supposed to wield since I couldn't freaking see it. The second issue is just this part's length is so short, which could be said about this entire fight, but we'll get to that. The Doomlord section in the light novel, though, is depicted as an epic back and forth, while here we barely get to see it at all. There's also two cut parts here where Ainz uses negative burst and sees that negative energy is ineffective, followed by him using perfect unknowable in an attempt to sneak behind PDL, only to take a sword to the gut since PDL can see through invisibility. The scene does kinda get the part where Ainz is analyzing all he learned so far, but this is changed and shortened to an extent most likely due to time constraints. Ainz also contacts Albedo here earlier than he would in the light novel due to a change which we will discuss shortly. Before that though, Ainz has the Doomlord activate an ability which increases its negative energy output, which increases its power at the cost of HP. This allows the Doomlord to land a few hits before it fades away. And now for the most disappointing part of this fight, the elemental skull and the entire missing part of the fight involving it. We'll start with the skull itself, because this is the most low effort thing I have ever seen in Overlord. Before I diss it though, let's see how it's described in the light novel, shall we? Ainz had timed for this as he cast Summon Undead 10th. It was a level 68 undead, an elemental skull. Its appearance was that of a floating skull. Surrounding it was a magical haze of light that constantly switched between 4 colors: red, blue, green, and yellow. So technically, they created what was described, a skull that has a haze which constantly change colors. However, does that mean that this looks good? No. You can get a C on an assignment and still pass, but that doesn't mean that the work was good. This looks like they took a skull model from the RPG Skeleton starting kit and threw a rainbow effect on it in After Effects. But Professor, it's in the episode for like 2 minutes, why put more effort into it? And there lies the other problem with this fight. Now, going into Season 4, I fully believe that it was because of this fight that Katakawa decided to jump all the way to Volume 14. I thought they wanted a big fight to close out this season, but after seeing how they handled this fight, I know that I was sorely mistaken. To start, this fight to an extent was poorly animated. I've already talked about the Doomlord and the elemental skull, and I don't want to say it looked completely horrible because it did look good in some places. But when you compare the explosion in this fight to the one in episode 9, it's clear that they didn't give this battle their all when it comes to the animation. Ainz's face do be looking kind of funny in some of these scenes as well. The biggest issue though, and a constant plague upon this anime, is the villain known as cut content. There is an entire section here where Ainz fights PDL head on while the skull is slinging spells, trying to find out which one works best. And Ainz also learns that hitting one of the floating weapons with the blasting staff has the same effect as hitting the main body. But all of that action is missing. Now, does this action need to be here? No, but its absence shortens an already short fight. And its absence takes away action that is rare in Overlord. A fight between two Nazarick level beings, kinda, isn't something we've seen since Season 1. So it missing here is disappointing to say the least, and it's left me wondering why we had to jump to Volume 14 when it's only damaged the coverage of Volumes 10 and 11. Putting the salt shaker down for a minute, and returning to the anime. Ainz throws himself at PDL's feet in hopes of getting him to talk, and he does slip up a little bit, more so in the light novel, so I'll tell you what he said there. For the most part, the dialogues are the same. Ainz went too far, people with power need to be careful with said power, and PDL is the protector of this world. Now this is what was cut. The deeds of those who gathered around my loving mother were wrong. They were wrong in the same way that father was. In the end, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It is the source of all faults. Followed by, although the root of every wrong can be traced back to us, I will not seek forgiveness for that. I cannot allow you to continue your current path of destruction. That is why, perish. Following this, there's a bit more fighting cut, but it's really just Ainz buying time till Albedo arrives. Which she does, since she has a world-class item, she passes right through PDL's barrier and proceeds to kick him to Timbuktu. PDL is spared Albedo's wrath though, as Ainz orders her to stop her assault. After failing to recruit PDL one last time, PDL pieces out and this fight comes to an end. We then follow PDL as he meets back up with Azith, having actually delayed his return in order to make sure Azith wasn't being observed by the Sorcerer's Kingdom. PDL's first question is how Azith managed to escape, because after his confrontation with Albedo, PDL was certain that Azith was dead. In truth, Albedo let him get away, but Azith believes that it was due to him laying down enough suppressive fire that he was able to escape. Azith, believing that it was his fault the plan failed, apologizes to PDL, but really, PDL admits that Ainz was far stronger than he had expected. PDL then mulls over the fact that while Ainz lacked the world-class item, Albedo did not, meaning that it's possible for Albedo to be the player. This shows that PDL is aware of the existence of players and NPCs, and his comments from the fight might hint at his species' involvement in them being brought to this world. Azith then asks if he were to team up with PDL, would he be able to defeat Ainz? While Azith probably couldn't do jack squat to Ainz, PDL does admit that if Azith dealt with the summons, it could work. The issue is Albedo. PDL does say that his abilities should help him against Ainz, but Albedo could most likely body PDL's armored puppet, meaning that PDL may need to take the field himself in order to win. PDL then reveals to Azith his alias of Riku Agnai, which he states is just a random name, but he does hint at the fact that the name has more meaning than he lets on. Finally, PDL contemplates killing Azith and taking the armor for someone stronger and more obedient, since Azith, having defied PDL's orders and saving Eniuel, kinda drastically changed Nazarik's plans during all of this. Of course, resurrection magic exists in this world, so just killing Azith probably wouldn't end well, so PDL decides to hold off on that idea for now. And finally, Albedo and Pandora's actor return to Nazarik, where Ainz awaits their reports on Riku and Azith. And with that, we reach the end of this episode. And this episode was the first one this season to disappoint me for reasons other than cut content. The overall execution of this battle made it feel more like an afterthought instead of the grand battle it could have been. Blame can't be completely placed on the animators. This really just feels like Katakawa wanted this out without considering the time it takes to make a great fight scene. Overall, this episode was fine, but it could have been so much better. That's all for me though. Make sure you like the video, comment down below about what you thought of this episode, and subscribe for more videos in the future. As always though, this has been the Professor Z, and I will see you all next time.